They stood in the spotlight, every strand of hair catching the glow, but some of those strands had never grown from their heads. Beneath the glamour and the studio lighting, Hollywood's most magnetic leading men were hiding a truth they prayed the cameras would never catch. Tonight, we strip away the illusion to uncover 16 legendary actors who owed part of their charm to a very carefully placed wig, and trust me, the last few names will leave you stunned. Humphrey Bogart, the tough guy's hidden secret. Humphrey Bogart wasn't just a movie star, he was the movie star. The man who could light a cigarette with a single flick, stare down the enemy, and walk away without looking back. To audiences, he was untouchable. But Bogart was also a man who understood that Hollywood's magic was built, in part, on illusion. By the early 1930s, while his career was still climbing, Bogart noticed something he couldn't fight with charm or determination. His hairline was slowly, steadily giving ground. In an industry where youth and image were worth their weight in gold, that posed a problem. Studios weren't about to let their rising star look older than his years. So a quiet decision was made behind closed dressing room doors. Bogart was fitted with a custom hairpiece, crafted to match the style and texture of his natural hair so perfectly that even his co-stars often couldn't tell the difference. On screen, the result was seamless. In Casablanca, as Rick Blaine, his fedora cast the perfect shadow across a hairline that, in reality, no longer existed. The hairpiece didn't just hide baldness, it preserved the Bogart mystique, allowing the tough guy legend to live on in every frame. And to this day, most viewers never realized that part of Humphrey Bogart's famous image was, quite literally, made to order. Fred Astaire, the dancer's perfect illusion. Fred Astaire didn't just dance, he seemed to float. Audiences could watch him for hours, hypnotized by the way he made even the most complex steps look like second nature. In films like Top Hat and Swing Time, he was the definition of grace. Tailored suits, polished shoes, and a head of neatly combed hair that never seemed to move out of place. But that last detail was more carefully engineered than anyone realized. Astaire's hair began thinning while he was still in his 20s, long before he became a household name. In a time when the public expected its leading men to look eternally youthful, a receding hairline wasn't just a cosmetic concern. It could change the kinds of roles a studio was willing to offer. So, quietly and without fuss, Astaire turned to a solution that would allow him to keep his image perfectly intact, a custom-made hairpiece. This wasn't any ordinary toupee. It had to be light enough to withstand hours of high-energy tap routines, yet secure enough that not a single strand would slip out of place mid-spin. It was designed to match his hair so precisely that even his co-stars, dancing just inches away, rarely suspected. The illusion was flawless. For decades, audiences believed they were watching a man untouched by time, as ageless as his routines. In truth, part of that timeless image rested on something that came off at the end of the day. Fred Astaire didn't just choreograph his dances, he choreographed his appearance, right down to the hair that helped make him a legend. Clark Gable, the King's crowning deception. Clark Gable was Hollywood royalty, the King, as audiences called him, with a charm so effortless it seemed almost unfair. He was the roguish Rhett Butler in Gone with the Wind, the dashing rogue who could win over anyone with a grin. And part of that signature look was his thick, perfectly styled hair, except much of it wasn't really his. By the late 1930s, even at the height of his fame, Gable was dealing with a receding hairline and thinning crown. Off-screen, friends and colleagues noticed the change, but on-screen, it simply couldn't be allowed to show. MGM's makeup and costume departments quietly stepped in, commissioning a meticulously crafted hairpiece. It wasn't a full wig, more like a partial system, blending seamlessly with what hair remained, creating the illusion of a youthful hairline under studio lighting. The work was so subtle that even in close-ups, no one suspected. In It Happened One Night, Mutiny on the Bounty, and countless others, the hairpiece was as much a part of Gable's wardrobe as his tailored suits. It withstood hot lights, long shoots, and the scrutiny of millions of adoring fans. To the public, Gable was ageless, the kind of man who would never let time catch him. But behind the scenes, the King of Hollywood knew that even legends need a little help. And his crown? It wasn't made of gold, but of carefully styled strands that kept the illusion alive. Cary Grant, the perfect gentleman's quiet trick. Cary Grant didn't just play suave characters, he was the blueprint for charm. With his tailored suits, that easy transatlantic voice, and a smile that could sell tickets on its own, he seemed untouched by time. But even the man who appeared to have it all had a secret he never advertised. By his late 20s, Grant's hairline had begun to creep back, a change that could have softened his leading man appeal in an era obsessed with youth. Rather than let nature dictate his image, Grant turned to the studio's trusted wigmakers. They crafted a subtle toupee designed to move naturally, with just enough variation in color to pass for the real thing under harsh lighting. It wasn't theatrical or obvious, it was meant to be invisible. In films like North by Northwest and An Affair to Remember, the hairpiece became part of the Cary Grant uniform. It allowed him to play younger than his years, to chase spies across rooftops or charm leading ladies without the distraction of a visibly aging hairline. Even close-ups couldn't betray the trick, it was that convincing. Off camera, Grant maintained an air of mystery about it. He never joked about the hairpiece, never confirmed or denied. He simply wore it, the same way he wore everything else in his life, with grace, precision, and an understanding that in Hollywood, image wasn't just important, it was everything. Sean Connery, Bond's hair-raising secret. Sean Connery's name became inseparable from most famous spy in cinema history, James Bond. In Dr. No, From Russia with Love and Goldfinger, he was the very picture of masculine cool, tailored tuxedos, that sly half-smile and thick, perfectly combed hair. But when Connery first stepped onto the Bond set in 1962, he brought with him something the audience never saw, a problem most men don't expect in their early 20s. By the time he was 21, Connery's hair was thinning rapidly. His hairline receded at the temples, and the crown began to bare. In everyday life, he accepted it without fuss. But James Bond was supposed to be flawless, a man who could seduce, brawl, and save the world without a strand out of place. Producers knew that letting their leading man appear prematurely balding simply wouldn't work for the fantasy they were selling. The solution was a carefully fitted hairpiece, sleek, natural, and designed to hold up under the intense scrutiny of cinema close-ups. It wasn't an ordinary wig, it was a studio-engineered illusion. Connery wore it in every Bond film he made in the 1960s, from the beaches of Jamaica to the casinos of Monte Carlo, always under the same confident poise. Ironically, Connery never tried to hide the truth in his personal life. Friends, co-stars, and crew all knew about the piece, and he occasionally removed it between takes. But to moviegoers, James Bond's hair was as much a part of his legend as his Aston Martin or his martinis. The fact that it wasn't entirely real only makes the illusion more perfect, and the legend even more enduring. Burt Reynolds, the rug that rode along. Burt Reynolds was the very definition of 1970s cool, a quick grin, a twinkle in the eye, and a mustache that became almost as famous as the man himself. From Smokey and the Bandit to Deliverance, he projected the image of a man who could handle anything, a fast car, a tough fight, or a romantic lead, without ever breaking a sweat. But that signature thick head of hair? That was a carefully managed part of his image. Reynolds began thinning in his 20s, just as his career was starting to gain traction. In Hollywood, that kind of early hair loss could quietly close doors to leading roles. Burt knew the power of first impressions, and so did the studios. The solution was an expertly made hairpiece, not a stiff or obvious wig, but something designed to blend so naturally that even under the scrutiny of a cinema close-up, it looked completely real. It became his constant companion. Whether he was tearing down a back road in a Trans AM or flashing that trademark smile on a talk show couch, the hairpiece was there, as much a part of the Burt Reynolds persona as his laugh or his cowboy boots. What made Reynolds' case interesting is that, unlike some stars who guarded the secret fiercely, he eventually embraced the joke. In later years, he openly acknowledged the rug, as he called it, turning what could have been a source of embarrassment into just another part of his larger-than-life charm. Still, for decades, the illusion held strong. Millions of fans believed they were seeing the real deal, and in a way, they were. Because Burt Reynolds didn't just wear a hairpiece, he wore it like a man wears confidence. Frank Sinatra, blue eyes and the perfect part. Frank Sinatra could command a room without saying a word. Those blue eyes, that easy swagger, and the voice that seemed to melt the air itself. But part of what made him so visually striking, especially in his younger years, was that sleek, perfectly groomed hair. What audiences didn't know was that by the early 1950s, Blue Eyes was fighting a quiet battle with the mirror. Sinatra's hair began thinning in his mid-30s, right around the time he was reinventing himself from a teen idol crooner into a serious actor and cultural icon. For a man whose image was so tied to cool, sharp style, visible hair loss wasn't just cosmetic. It could have dulled the charisma he projected. Hollywood makeup artists and hairstylists stepped in, crafting a custom hairpiece that could survive long performances, hot stage lights, and the relentless scrutiny of close-up camera shots. Sinatra's piece was designed for flexibility. On stage, it stayed tight through every head turn and dramatic gesture. On film, it blended so well that even in high-contrast black and white, it looked completely natural. Unlike some actors, Sinatra didn't switch to a wig that changed his style. His hairpiece matched the signature look he'd been known for since the start. Off-stage, close friends knew about it, but Sinatra treated it as simply part of the wardrobe, no different from the tuxedo or the polished shoes. And because he carried himself with such confidence, the hairpiece became invisible to the audience's perception. They saw only the star. For decades, millions believed they were watching the same youthful hair Sinatra had in his Bobby Soxer days. In truth, the man who sang about wearing his heart on his sleeve kept one small secret on his head, and wore it with flawless style. Bing Crosby, the crooner's careful cover. Bing Crosby's voice was like velvet, smooth, warm, and instantly recognizable. His easygoing style and relaxed presence made him one of the most beloved entertainers of the 20th century. In films, on radio, and later television, Bing always seemed unflappable, a man in control, dressed neatly, hair perfectly in place. But as early as the 1930s, Crosby was already dealing with thinning hair that the public never saw. In an age before high-definition cameras, audiences still expected their leading men to look picture-perfect. Bing's hair loss, while gradual, was visible enough off-screen that the studios decided it needed to be addressed for the sake of his wholesome image. The solution came in the form of a light, close-fitting hairpiece designed to blend seamlessly with his remaining hair. It wasn't flashy or overly styled. In fact, it was intentionally understated. The goal wasn't to make Bing look like a matinee idol. It was to maintain the everyday, approachable charm that had made him a household name. Whether he was playing a laid-back priest in Going My Way or crooning White Christmas in Holiday Inn, the piece gave him that soft, neat hairline audiences had come to expect. What made Crosby's case different was how naturally the hairpiece fit into his performances. It moved with him, held up under stage lights, and never distracted from a main attraction, that voice. In interviews, he rarely spoke about it, and friends knew better than to bring it up. For millions of fans, the illusion worked perfectly. They saw only the friendly, smooth-singing figure who seemed untouched by time. And while the hair may not have all been his, the easy charm that made Bing Crosby a legend was entirely genuine. Danny Kaye, the comedian's clever cover. Danny Kaye was one of Hollywood's most versatile performers, a whirlwind of energy who could sing, dance, act, and improvise with dazzling speed. In films like The Secret Life of Walter Mitty and White Christmas, he was a master of physical comedy and quick-fire dialogue, always radiating youthful enthusiasm. Part of that youthful image came from his boyish smile, expressive eyes, and a thick head of hair that wasn't entirely his own. Kaye's hair began thinning earlier than most fans would guess, and for a man whose on-screen persona often required him to play energetic, sometimes even naive characters, the appearance of age could work against him. Studios were invested in keeping his image fresh, and that meant finding a discreet way to keep his hairline looking full. Wardrobe and makeup departments turned to a lightweight, flexible hairpiece. It had to be different from the more rigid styles worn by other actors. Kaye's roles often demanded big, physical movements, from elaborate dance sequences to wild slapstick routines. The hairpiece needed to stay secure while still allowing for that signature, messy but charming look he often sported. Audiences never suspected. Whether he was cracking a rapid-fire joke or breaking into song, the illusion held. On screen, the hairpiece gave him that extra touch of youthful vibrancy. Off-screen, it was simply another tool in his performer's kit, like a costume or a prop. Friends and crew members often commented on how natural it looked, even up close. And that was the key. Danny Kaye's hairpiece didn't just sit on his head, it performed alongside him. For decades, it helped preserve the image of the tireless entertainer whose energy seemed limitless, even if his hair wasn't. Yul Brynner, the bald icon who wore hair. Yul Brynner is remembered today for one of the most instantly recognizable looks in film history, the clean-shaven head that became his signature in The King and I and The Ten Commandments. That bald, regal image was so distinctive that it was hard to imagine him any other way. And yet, in the early part of his career, before embracing baldness, Brynner occasionally wore wigs on screen, not for style, but for the same reason many of his contemporaries did, to hide thinning hair. Before The King and I made his bald head iconic, Brynner acted in smaller roles where casting directors often expected a traditional leading man appearance. This meant hair, or the convincing illusion of it. Makeup and costume departments fitted him with carefully designed wigs, each crafted to match the tone of the role. Some were short and conservative, others fuller, styled to match the romantic leads of the era. These early hairpieces weren't always perfect. In certain photographs and lesser-known performances, you can spot the subtle stiffness of the wig. But they served their purpose, helping Brynner fit the Hollywood mold before he redefined it entirely. Ironically, the decision to shave his head for The King and I was initially just for the stage role, not a personal style choice. The look was so striking that it became part of his identity, and Brynner quickly realized he no longer needed to hide hair loss at all. Still, those earlier performances remain a fascinating footnote, proof that even the man who made baldness glamorous once relied on Hollywood's oldest trick. In the end, Brynner's greatest transformation wasn't from wig to bald head, but from fitting in to standing out. Robert Taylor, MGM's perfect profile. With a little help. Robert Taylor was one of MGM's most polished creations, a matinee idol whose striking looks, smooth voice, and elegant demeanor made him a favorite in romance dramas and swashbuckling adventures. Studio publicists called him the man with the perfect profile, and on screen, it was hard to argue. But what the cameras didn't reveal was that part of Taylor's carefully curated image included a well-kept secret on top of his head. By his late 30s, Taylor was experiencing noticeable hair thinning, particularly at the crown and hairline. In an era when MGM was fiercely protective of its stars' images, this wasn't treated as a minor detail, it was a priority problem. The studio's hair and makeup department worked with Hollywood's top wig makers to create a custom hairpiece that would not only match Taylor's natural hair, but also photograph flawlessly under the intense lighting of black and white and early Technicolor films. These pieces were designed with precision, soft, natural fibers, individually knotted, and styled to match whatever the role required. In romantic period films like Camille or adventure tales like Ivanhoe, Taylor's hair always appeared full and strong, reinforcing the image of eternal leading man. The illusion was so convincing that many co-stars never realized he was wearing one, even in scenes that required physical action or close embraces. Off-camera, Taylor was known for his professionalism, and part of that meant never drawing attention to the mechanics of his appearance. For decades, audiences believed they were watching a man who had been blessed with both extraordinary looks and everlasting youth. In truth, Taylor's enduring image was a blend of natural charm and Hollywood craftsmanship, a reminder that even perfection sometimes needs a little help from the wardrobe department. Gene Kelly, the dancer who defied the spotlight. Gene Kelly was more than just a dancer, he was a force of nature. Athletic, confident, and endlessly creative, he brought a new kind of masculinity to musicals, blending grace with strength. In Singin' in the Rain, An American in Paris, and On the Town, he dazzled audiences with routines that seemed to defy physics. But while his on-screen presence was full of energy and confidence, there was one detail Kelly worked to keep off the public stage: his thinning hair. Kelly's hairline began receding in his 30s, right as his fame was reaching its peak. Under the bright, unforgiving lights of a soundstage, even a small amount of thinning could stand out on camera. And because so much of Kelly's appeal came from his youthful, vigorous persona, maintaining a full head of hair became part protecting that image. The solution was a lightweight, secure hairpiece, one that could survive leaps, spins, and hours of physically demanding dance sequences without shifting. Unlike heavier wigs, Kelly's hairpiece was designed for movement, using fine materials that allowed it to stay natural-looking even during close-ups. In musicals, where choreographed numbers often required dozens of takes, the piece had to perform as consistently as Kelly himself. Whether drenched in rainwater or spinning through a fast-paced duet, it held up without drawing attention. Off-screen, Kelly kept the matter private, viewing the hairpiece as simply part of the costume, no different than the tap shoes or tailored suits that completed his performances. And while the hair may not have been entirely his, the charisma, athleticism, and joy he brought to the screen were 100% genuine. For audiences, the illusion was perfect, and that's exactly how Kelly wanted it. David Niven, the gentleman's invisible accessory. David Niven seemed born to wear a tuxedo. With his refined manners, quick wit, and that ever-present twinkle in his eye, he embodied the perfect English gentleman on screen. Whether in romantic comedies, war dramas, or spy thrillers, Niven carried himself with effortless charm. But as polished as his image was, there was one small element of his presentation that didn't come entirely naturally: his full head of hair. Niven began to notice his hair thinning in the 1940s, at a time when he was firmly established as a leading man. In those days, audiences expected their screen idols to remain eternally youthful, and for a performer whose brand relied so much on elegance and style, a receding hairline could subtly change how casting directors viewed him. The solution was simple but essential: a finely crafted hairpiece designed to blend flawlessly with his own hair. Niven's hairpieces were known for their subtlety. They weren't overly styled or dramatic, they simply maintained the natural look he had in his younger years. In films like Around the World in 80 Days and The Pink Panther, the illusion was so good that even co-stars sometimes forgot he wore one. The key was how naturally it moved with him, whether he was in a ballroom scene or dashing away from danger. Off camera, Niven was famously discreet. He didn't make jokes about the piece, nor did he treat it as a point of vanity. It was just another part of the professional presentation that kept his career flourishing. For audiences, the hairline seemed timeless, as if age had politely agreed to leave him alone. In truth, it was careful craftsmanship and quiet confidence that kept David Niven looking the part of the perfect gentleman year after year. Charles Boyer, the romantic illusionist. Charles Boyer was the embodiment of European charm in classic Hollywood. With his soft voice, intense gaze, and sophisticated manner, he became the quintessential romantic lead of the 1930s and 1940s. Audiences adored him in films like Gaslight, Algiers, and Love Affair, where his smooth delivery and debonair style made hearts race. And part of that image was his thick, well-groomed hair, which by the height of his career was not entirely his own. Boyer's hair began thinning earlier than most people realized, and for a man who made his living as a suave seducer on screen, a receding hairline threatened to soften that image. Hollywood's solution was straightforward: a finely made hairpiece, custom-fitted to match his natural texture and color. This was no theatrical wig. It was designed to be invisible, blending seamlessly into the illusion of perpetual youth. The toupee became part of Boyer's on-screen armor. Whether he was leaning close to deliver a whispered line or stepping into the glow of a romantic close-up, the hairpiece helped maintain the aura that audiences expected. It was crafted to hold up under intense lighting and styled so naturally that it appeared untouched even during emotional, physically expressive scenes. Off camera, Boyer treated the matter with quiet professionalism. He understood that his image was part of the product Hollywood was selling, and the hairpiece was simply one more tool, like lighting, wardrobe, and makeup, to maintain that product. For moviegoers, the effect was flawless. They saw only the man who could sweep a leading lady into his arms and make her, and the audience, believe every word. The truth was a small hidden detail, one that only added to Boyer's mastery of the art of illusion. John Wayne, the Duke's hidden armor. John Wayne wasn't just a movie star, he was an American symbol. Towering on screen, with a slow, deliberate stride and a voice that rumbled like distant thunder, the Duke defined rugged masculinity for generations. Whether riding across the plains in stagecoach or leading troops in The Longest Day, he always looked unshakable. But even John Wayne had a quiet vulnerability, one he kept carefully hidden. By the early 1940s, he was losing his hair. Wayne's receding hairline became noticeable to those working closely with him, but for audiences, the change was masked by an expertly designed hairpiece. Hollywood's wardrobe department created a rugged, natural-looking toupee that fit Wayne's image. Not overly styled, but thick and practical, the kind of hair a frontier hero might naturally have. The piece was made for endurance. It had to survive hours of outdoor filming, dust storms on desert sets, and Wayne's own physically demanding performances. Whether galloping on horseback or squaring off in fistfight, the hairpiece stayed put, allowing the Duke to look every bit the unbreakable hero. Interestingly, Wayne never went out of his way to deny the toupee in private circles, but he didn't discuss it publicly either. In a career where image was everything, he understood that the symbol of John Wayne, strong, unwavering, eternally capable, mattered more than the details of what was under the hat. For decades, the combination of that iconic Stetson, the steely gaze, and the natural hairline created a flawless illusion. Fans saw only the cowboy hero, never the careful craftsmanship behind the look. In Wayne's case, the toupee wasn't vanity. It was part of the armor that allowed him to remain the Duke in every frame. William Holden, the leading man's quiet fix. William Holden was the kind of star who could seem both approachable and magnetic at the same time. In Sunset Boulevard, Stalag 17, and The Bridge on the River Kwai, he combined rugged masculinity with a natural, understated charm. His sandy blonde hair, neatly styled, was part of that appeal, giving him the look of an all-American leading man. But as his career advanced into the 1950s, Holden faced the same challenge that quietly affected many of his peers. His hair was thinning, and the camera didn't miss a thing. The studio system, still at full strength, took swift action. A discreet, custom-made hairpiece was commissioned, not overly thick, but enough to restore the youthful hairline that audiences associated with Holden's early success. The toupee was designed with his active roles in mind, secure enough to handle action scenes and outdoor shoots, but fine enough in texture to look completely natural in close-ups. Holden wore it in many of his most famous films, the illusion so seamless that even critics and co-stars rarely noticed. In romantic scenes, it framed his face without drawing attention. In war dramas, it stood up to wind, sweat, and movement without shifting. Off-set, Holden didn't treat the hairpiece as a source of embarrassment, but neither did he draw attention to it. For him, it was a practical necessity, another tool that allowed him to keep playing the kinds of roles audiences loved him for. For moviegoers, the effect was effortless. They saw only the confident, handsome star they'd admired for years. The truth that a small piece of Hollywood craftsmanship helped complete the image remained invisible. And in the end, that was exactly the point. Tony Curtis, the heartthrob's secret strand. Tony Curtis burst onto the Hollywood scene in the late 1940s with matinee idol looks, an easy grin, and jet black hair that became part of his brand. In films like Some Like It Hot, The Defiant Ones, and Spartacus, he projected a mixture of charm, wit, and youthful energy that made him one of the era's most bankable stars. But behind that signature style, Curtis was concealing something from the adoring crowds. By his mid-30s, his thick hair was beginning to thin. For an actor whose public image leaned heavily on his heartthrob status, visible hair loss wasn't just a small detail, it was a potential career obstacle. Curtis and his studio stylists acted quickly, commissioning a finely crafted hairpiece that could pass undetected under the scrutiny of movie cameras. The piece matched his natural dark hair perfectly, with a cut that allowed for the slick, stylish look he was famous for. It wasn't only for the close-ups. Curtis's roles often involved energetic physical scenes, from comedic chases to intense action sequences. The hairpiece had to hold up under movement, heat, and long shooting days without ever revealing its presence. And it did, so effectively that even many of his co-stars were unaware. Off-screen, Curtis maintained his polished image, appearing at premieres and public events with the same perfectly styled hair fans saw on the silver screen. He rarely addressed the toupee directly, preferring to let the illusion speak for itself. For audiences, Tony Curtis was eternally the charismatic leading man, his hair untouched by time. In reality, part of that image came from the same Hollywood magic that built his career, a small, unseen detail that helped keep the fantasy alive. And there you have it, 16 of old Hollywood's most celebrated leading men, each with a secret hidden just above the eyes. From dancers who seemed to defy gravity to rugged cowboys and suave gentlemen, these actors shaped an era of film that continues to inspire and enchant. Their performances, their style, and their screen presence were unforgettable, but as we've seen, even legends relied on a little behind-the-scenes craftsmanship to keep the magic alive. It's a reminder that Hollywood has always been a place of illusion. The clothes, the lighting, the sets, the makeup, and yes, sometimes the hair, all work together to create the larger-than-life images that audiences fell in love with. These stars weren't diminished by their use of hairpieces. If anything, it showed their dedication to their craft and to giving viewers the version of their characters they wanted to see. And perhaps that's the real takeaway. Movie magic is never about one element. It's about the whole picture, the total performance, and the ability to make us believe in the story, even if part of it is held in place with a few invisible pins. If you enjoyed this trip through Hollywood history, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss our next journey behind the curtain. Give this video a like if you learned something new, and let us know in the comments which of these names surprised you the most, or if there's another star you think deserves a spot on this list. Your thoughts help keep the conversation alive.